Welcome to the If You Build It, Will They Learn podcast, a show dedicated to modern learning and development, with your hosts, Daniel Mendonca and Scott Babcock.
It's podcast day. Welcome to the show. This is If You Build It, Will They Learn? I'm Scott Babcock, and sitting next to me, live and in person for the first time ever during a podcast, is your co-host, Daniel Mendonca. Daniel, it feels real weird. I don't really know what to do with my hands right now. How you been?
Doing well. Happy to welcome you to Canada for the first time since the podcast started, which is episode 70 today. Which is pretty crazy.
Yeah.
So 70 episodes later, we let you in the country. The border is open for one way.
I hope I get to go home. We'll see.
Maybe they'll let you back in, but we are in person. Sabrina is behind the camera, as she typically is, the producer, and we're excited to get into it.
The cues on this is going to feel real weird. I feel like I'm always staring straight ahead, but now that's just a corner of a room. I actually have to turn slightly, and it's going to be interesting. But I'm super excited. This is kind of fun. Very different. We improv'd a little solution here, but from the mic and everything else. But we're going to bring you a fun show today. We are going to be talking about the idea of specialization versus generalization. And some of the pitfalls that organizations go through as they sort of evaluate these things, some of the reasons why an organization might spend time promoting specialization or generalization with their employees and things, and how that translates ultimately, obviously, to learning, as that's our topic for all of our shows. So without further ado, let's jump right in. All right, it's always good to start at the beginning, so let's begin with just a kind of brief overview of when we say generalization versus specialization, what exactly are we talking about? That's probably as good a place as any to begin. And so one of the areas, so we oftentimes, when we think about our position or our role, we want to become experts, and so we dive really, really deep into that, and we become very specialized in that topic or that role or that information or knowledge. And we tend to gain more and more expertise. And look, that makes us feel good to be seen as an expert in our field. So when we specialize in something, we tend to go fairly narrow, or potentially even narrower and narrower as we get more information. And we get hyper-focused on that one particular topic. When we're talking about generalization, it's someone who chooses to absorb as much content about as many topics as possible. They become sort of a broad spectrum type of knowledge base, and they're not necessarily focused on one particular element, but maybe they're dabbling a bit in a number of fields or topics.
It's an interesting topic, and I'm excited about this one because I think you coach, and obviously you work, and I coach and work, and depending on where you are at in your personal journey, whether it's at work or in something you enjoy, you're in a situation where generalization may be the right thing to do, or specialization may be the right thing to do. There is definitely not a one-size-fits-all answer to this, and so it's a great topic to discuss, and I think the way you outlined it was perfect, and I'm excited to kind of dive deeper on that and how it relates to people's everyday actions.
Yeah, we're going to bring some real world examples of people that might fall into these categories, but the reality is I don't know that there's a right or a wrong version of this for everybody. This is a lot about what your interests are, or maybe the work you're doing. I think there's probably a difference for people that are beginning their journey versus maybe more established. As you learn things about yourself, you may find areas that you want to become more specialized in versus kind of sampling from all things that are available to you. So we're going to definitely start with bringing some real world notions to this, but this topic is very interesting, I think, in the world of learning. So as we talk through the real world examples, we'll always try to bring that back to what is the knowledge that we're talking about? How do you disseminate that? What does it mean for different types of people? And then how do you as L&D professionals make this stuff go, right? So, all right, so let's give a couple real world examples of specialization versus generalization and how individuals can ultimately be really, really successful in both or through both. One example that I have read about and comes up, and we're probably more familiar with one than we are the other when it comes to the where they started, but how they finished. I think we're both going to recognize these names. So the first one I'm going to tell you was these are both athletes because we both like sports. Why not draw from that world? The first one is someone who was almost preordained to join their sport. So at the age of something like 6 months old, they got their first equipment. By the age of 2, they were hitting golf shots on Johnny Carson's stage, right? And goes on to become some of the most winning golfer, one of the most winning golfers in the world, high expertise, seen as dominating the sport for quite some time. Not going to surprise anyone when I tell you that's Tiger Woods. So from a very, very early age, he resonated with a particular sport and just dove headlong into that. So the second athlete we'll talk about was someone that didn't even begin specializing in a particular sport until they were in their teenage years. So started out playing football, soccer, basketball, tennis, badminton, all manner of different sports. And in fact, I actually had a parent who was a coach of the sport that they ultimately ended in, who said, I don't want to coach my son in this category because they were worried they'd push them too hard into a sport that they might ultimately not have that much interest in. And then eventually, this individual went on, got focused on it, became part of his career, and is one of, if not the most winningest male tennis stars of all time, and Roger Federer. So two different paths that ultimately ended with people at the top of their individual sports for at least a period of time. But both took a very different path to get there. So when we talk about, I think you mentioned the idea that specialization and generalization, not one is necessarily right. This actually worked for both people, but it's finding out what works for you that it becomes that really important piece.
Yeah, it's interesting. You talk about Tiger Woods. Specialization is a difficult thing to kind of work through. You have to have the right support structure in place. You have to have the right information that comes to you, because when you deal with specialization, boredom or burnout, as a lot of people deal with in their roles currently, is a big risk. And one of the reasons with sports that a lot of athletic and sports organizations nowadays with kids recommend multi-sport athletes and generalization is because they want to reduce burnout in a world where information and everything is very, very fast moving and reacts quickly. So, looking at Tiger Woods, I think that if you look at athletes as a whole, they always have somewhere else where they started. And he really didn't have another sport that he played or another activity that he was involved in. It was all golf all the time, but he had the support structure and his mother and father who supported him through that. And as success came, he continued to push through and want more of it rather than burning out because of the overall exhaustion.
Well, and Tiger's probably the anomaly when we talk about especially youth sports, I think. And it's funny, his success path has led for some people to advocate for what's called actually Tiger parenting, which is where a parent chooses the path for the child and then pushes them down that. And that doesn't necessarily have to be sports. It could be you're going to be a doctor, or you're going to be a lawyer, or you're going to be a plumber. I mean, you're following the family tradition, right? Maybe, and they're going to push you towards a career before they even know whether that's something you want or is it going to have something you're passionate about. And Tiger has admittedly, I've read that the concern was that did his dad force a club into his hand and force him to go do these things? And he's very openly said, no, I had to beg my dad to take me to a golf course every time. And so in this case, a child chose that. So it's never really been something that's been forced on him, but that happens a ton. I'm sure you see it as you get even soccer players coming into the collegiate ranks. There's probably some that have been told this is what they have to do forever. And at some point now they get some independence. And you probably, I would imagine, have seen players realize that that isn't what they love or that that's not where they want to be. And they maybe fall out of the ranks. I know at the youth level that I spend time on, we're already starting to see it at 9 and 10 that we've got players who play baseball for us and they like baseball, but it's almost more about like hanging out with their friends.
Yeah.
Like that's really why they play baseball. And at some point, baseball will become competitive enough for them that they'll probably fall out of the system and not have that be their sport of choice, or maybe they'll find something else that they really love. And so I think it's just interesting to see how kids at that age deserve the right to kind of sample and choose unless they're that Tiger Woods that just immediately knows what they want.
Yeah, I think people will paint their own path, and as we take real world examples and relate it to the work world, I think people find their own path. We've talked about the idea of mastery versus movement before, and those sorts of things. So when people play multiple. If you think the Roger Federer example, play all different sports, whether it's soccer, football, badminton, and all sorts of other things. He's from Switzerland, so he probably did some skiing and some other things as well in his life. But you start to figure out what your passion is, what where you want to start spending your time and enjoy yourself doing, and where you're most excited to be, and you end up landing there. And I think generalization probably puts you in that place where you want to be. But yeah, going back to what you said, Scott, 100% at the collegiate level, we see people fall off the path of they don't really want to keep doing this the way they're doing it because it's all they've done for the past 10 years, and they're just done with it. They want to go party. They want to have they want to have fun.
They want to be kids. Yeah.
And I think that's what career pathing, the appropriate amounts of learning path and growth assist you with. I think that they allow people to dabble in areas of the organization that they may also want to achieve. And I think entry level positions. I think in every show that has a lawyer involved, you always hear about the mail room and how the mail room person starts, becomes a paralegal and goes from there. But that's a great example of someone who they start in the mailroom and then they allow them to be a generalist at the organization and do a lot of different things and eventually figure out where they want to specialize. Because eventually, using the phrase jack of all trades, master of none, eventually at some point you do have to start to specialize in something, so you can really master. Or there's obviously people who just like to do lots of stuff, and that's okay too. But I think that transition from generalization to specialization occurs when you find that thing that you're truly passionate about.
Absolutely. All right. So one of the things that obviously we've talked through sort of the real world, but hopefully helps define it or make it more real for people, and they can kind of resonate with a story that talks it through, so you can kind of think about it in real life terms. But how does this translate to the pitfalls that we organizationally find? So in your organization, where does focusing on one or the other, or neither in some cases, where will it cause you some grief? Where will it cause you some of those common places of kind of just misses with maybe your employees, your partners, your vendors, your customers even? And I'm going to start with the first one, which is we tend to focus on, hey, there's a silver bullet, right, that is going to solve all my problems. And the reality is, when you look at a broad spectrum of employees, there likely isn't that one size fits all approach to learning or training in your organization. I think we want to think there is more often than not. This is the master curriculum that will take you from hire date to wildly successful salesperson in 90 days. And while that probably works for a good chunk through some testing and some just experience, there's going to be somebody who during that 90-day window finds out that sales wasn't the thing they love, right? Or that training program becomes exhausting, or it's not speaking to them in the way that it should. And so we have to understand that when we talk about those individuals that maybe think differently or need something else, or maybe misappropriately put into a role because they needed a job and we needed a head count, how do our choices are either to say, well, we're going to kind of cut bait and let them go because they weren't a fit for the one size approach we have, or do we try to find ways to let them spread and find their location in our organization? Maybe they can still provide value, it's just not where we thought they would at first.
The one size fits all example, I think, is the overarching part of this that really outlines where as an organization you should function. I think we've talked about getting to know your people, getting to know your learners, the people who work for you, understand what makes them tick and how you can positively affect their role. And part of that is not necessarily, even when you think about generalists, it's not necessarily that they don't want to become a specialist in their job, but maybe if they're in a sales role, understanding or having a base level of knowledge of, I'll use our organization example, of customer support and development and creative, and all those other things allows you to be a better salesperson, right? Rather than just staying in your lane and understanding sales. So getting to know each one of your individual employees and how they can, be successful in their role and how they define success for themselves, I think is big. We've talked about this before, and I know this is a topic that Scott and I discuss as well, but there's lots of conversation around the Great Resignation right now, right? In the US especially, but in Canada as well. And employees really have a lot of leverage. But a lot of that is because their employers just haven't taken the time to ask them, what they want in their role or what they want out of their role. And maybe that's not okay for the organization, but having the conversation allows people to start to look at generalization or a different field to specialize in as an option rather than just leaving the organization and jumping to what you think are greener pastures, but most likely aren't.
Yeah, I think there's a certain level of like trust that has to be built up with your employees and as an organization that you're willing to have that conversation openly and non-judgmentally. That if you're not comfortable or not happy in what you're doing now, rather than just, if you don't want them to jump ship to the greener pasture that is this thing that ultimately probably isn't as green as they thought it was, and then they end up jumping again. Like, if you want to work on retaining, it's understanding that those people, it's okay for them to say, you know what, I tried this, it wasn't my right fit, my match, but I think I might be interested in this. There's ways we'll talk about. You can almost proactively allow them to explore some of those. Which, worst case scenario, they get information that, to your point, might help them become a stronger person in their own role as they dig deeper into that. So help with problem solving and things like that.
I love the point that you made, and this is your point, is the concept of that specialization really is only 100% effective when things don't change. And the reality is the world we live in is things are changing constantly. And yeah, you may be specialized in your role, but can you imagine if you were a VP of marketing at an agency and you refused to learn about social media over the past 10 years? Like, that would be a massive pitfall for your organization because you still be advertising in newspapers and magazines and on TV, and that's not where the ROI is. So you have to change and you have to adapt, and generalization may not be the right term for that, but just expanding your horizons and being willing to go into different avenues related to what you're specialized in allows you to open your mind and build off the solid foundation that you have.
When someone who's generalized to whatever degree that we're talking about this and has learned something about that expanded world, allows, it's not that you don't need specialized people. That person who has got tenure and experience and is very familiar with marketing strategies is still incredibly valuable and has a ton of information, but it's learning from someone who then maybe is a bit more broad and is looking at broader technologies that are up and coming and saying, oh, hey, have you heard about this thing called the internet or social media or whatever? That, I mean, these are all iterations over the last 20 or 30 years. Mm-hmm. And they come together and say, hey, you're really good at this. I'm experiencing this. Can we work together? And now you have these really great solutions and ideas coming. So it's really a good mix of both. And to me, when I think about specialization, it's really about what did I find passion around, right? And if I'm not passionate about the thing I'm doing today, that doesn't mean it doesn't have value for somebody or that there's not a certain individual who might want to do this more, but I need to find my passion so then I can really dig in and say, okay, I want to learn more and more about this and then help others, right? So I think eventually we hope everyone finds a specialty or something they really love to do, but it may take some effort to get there. And as an organization, one of the things that I think can be really detrimental to you is, hey, we hired you to do this. I need you to be really good at this. And sometimes that's not possible because they either don't have the passion, the energy, the skill, the whatever. But I might be really good at something else. And as an organization, you're willing to support that reach, that the ability for people to explore and find the thing that they might have a lot of interest in. And again, potentially just bring it back to their current job.
I think, on that point, Scott, you've talked about this before, you have an environmental science background. We have another employee here of ours who has a kinesiology background, and, they manage finance and client accounts. And that just comes from the idea of generalization and wanting to learn about different areas of the organization and build off of those things to allow them to specialize and find their passion, something that they really want to be a part of. For Scott, it was learning and development, working with technology. So there's a lot you can build off of, but I think generalization is about discovery. I know we've encouraged people who listen to this podcast to learn and discover and figure out what they're passionate about. And that's no different for, through the generalization process. So eventually you can get to a point where you find that specialty for you.
All right, so let's bring it all home. And the reality is, okay, so we know what specialization is. We know what generalization is. We've seen it in life a little bit, and we know how it can show up. We've talked about some of the pitfalls an organization makes, but as always, like, what do you do with that information? How do you take that back and make change, institute change, think differently about these things within your own organization, your own role, your own departments, whatever that might be. And there's a whole bunch of things you can do. Daniel mentioned one of them. I think it's a lesson I learned quite a while ago while working at Best Buy. And it was someone presented the idea of mastery versus movement. It was probably the first time in my career that I didn't make the automatic assumption that I had to be really good vertically, right? This is me going up a ladder until I become the director or the VP or eventually a CEO or whatever. And it was always about mastery, which is tackle this, get really good at it, take the next task. Get really good at it, move up the ladder, move up the ladder. And the reality is, someone then said it's okay to be okay to think about, or the movement versus mastery component is maybe I'm okay where I am and I'm really found my niche, right? And that can be specialty. Movement can also be lateral, right? So it doesn't always have to be you're going up the ladder, but maybe you're going to step across the hall and go up the stairs instead because you found another department. And so letting people find their path or be okay just getting really good. And that's that specialization. Generalization might be, I need to branch out. I need to try some things and give them a run at it.
I think on that note, like one of the things that I've seen with younger employees who have come here right out of university or, clients who we work with, I think one of the things that doesn't get talked about enough is that, not moving upward in your role is actually okay. And I think people sometimes validate their value with promotions and growth in a company. And I know people don't want to be a base level employee their entire life, but also, with higher roles and responsibilities come additional, or higher roles come additional responsibilities as well, additional stresses and other things. So I think part of that specialization, generalization, mastery versus movement conversation is, if you're a mentor and if you have people that you work with who are young and looking for, telling them that it's okay to master a role and become a specialist after you found your passion is okay. You don't always have to be changing roles and changing adjustments. You don't have to be a manager of people or process. You can just be really good at what you do. It's something that I think gets lost because everybody's always striving to be the best thing they can be. But you can be the best thing you can be in a single role and over time.
Well, and you can also be really good at it without feeling the pressure, right? I think it was Mark Twain who once said, if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life.
Uh-huh.
And the reality is, if you love what you do, why should you feel forced to go do something else, right? And that's okay. I've worked with folks in the past who constantly were peppered with, hey, you're a manager in this department, but don't you want to be a general manager of the store or this, that, and the other? And they're like, no, I love what I do here. And I think if I take on that other role, I won't be able to do this as much. And that's self-awareness that's really important, and then you become really, really good at what you do, and you can have that encouragement. So as an organization, are you supporting that kind of thought process to say, I really want to specialize in this and dig in, or do you want to broaden and get more experience that you can bring back to maybe a larger role that you need to find? So that's a really good one that you can focus on. And a good segue then is, if we're talking about someone who has said, look, I haven't found my niche yet, I haven't found my sweet spot, are you providing learning paths or opportunities for people to get experience and exposure without having to just immediately jump from role to role to role? Can you broaden their horizons and give them a view? So if I am in sales, can I take training, knowledge increase, instructional areas that show me a little bit about what logistics is like, or a little bit about finance, or a little bit about operations? Can I start to peek over the fence? Really going to carry this greener pasture on the other side as far as I can, but can I peek over the fence and really get a look at the grass without necessarily jumping the fence and going whole hog into that other field, right? And if you have those windows, you can start to have people who are still executing on the job they have today, but it's not a bad thing to let them start to feel out and get information.
I want to bring something up on what you just said, because this is a conversation we had with an HR talent acquisition department who we work with at a client. They said one of the biggest issues that they ran into throughout COVID and the pandemic with being remote was that people didn't know that they could peek over the fence in their own organization.
Yeah.
If they weren't happy in their own role, they chose to go to a different company and apply externally rather than just speak to their manager and talk to HR and think about moving departments in their own organization, because realistically, different departments in the same organization are different companies. They have their own process, they have their own product and service that they provide either internally or externally. So that was one of the big challenges. And so you see a lot of people talk about the Great Resignation, jumping from job to job to find what fits for them. And everybody I know personally who is doing that or has done that is very dissatisfied with where they're at in their current role because they're always starting fresh. And starting fresh is a bunch more information you need to learn yourself, a bunch more information or process that you have to digest, get comfortable with, new people, all those things. So that's a big something that's interesting. I think to move past that, like you said, you want to have conversations with people. We have a thing at HALIGHT, and I always say this when new employees join, when I meet with them, is nobody's too busy to have a conversation with you, right? And I'll always have conversations with new employees here, but reach out to managers or directors in the departments that interest you and ask questions and talk to them about what their day job looks like and if there are opportunities to open up. So all that's possible, even in a remote world.
Yeah, and I'm amazed because I think I'm with you that most of the people that I have found that leave also tend to leave the next job within a window that would be way too short to actually know if you like it. That always blows me away that like they've not only jumped ship and they've gone over to try this other thing, but then they leave again in like 60 more days. And you're like, man, it takes 90 or 120 or a year to fully get yourself ingrained, to understand all the people, to understand the culture and everything else. Like, and then you're just starting over again and you're having to do that again and again and again and again. How do you ever really find your niche? So if you can take some of that out and say like, look, I already know this company. I already understand our culture high level. I understand some systems. I understand some processes. That leap to that next job within your own organization is often less scary or more predictable in a way that can be really beneficial. And I'll say this because I always find it interesting. We're always a bit hesitant to let someone leave our department, but the reality is I've often found that then becomes the biggest advocate to work with as a business partner.
Yep.
Right. Like, so now you have someone who knows how you do your work and what pitfalls you have and what struggles you go through. And now they represent you on the other side of the wall. And so you often get a better business partner by letting them expand. That's just another benefit, I guess, to that as well. The upside to things like when we talk about training and giving people that view is that you're also doing it at a low risk, right? So if you go try another organization and you're going to have all this coming at you through a fire hose, right? Whereas this, you can kind of sample if you're building that within your own organization and you're given the opportunity to explore learning opportunities or paths within your own organization. There's just less of a feeling of being overwhelmed, and I think that's a big sense of advantage for your employees to feel that lack of pressure that often comes with having to like really perform right away out of the gates.
Yeah, and I think just to add with that, like a lot of the world we live in right now. This is a little bit on a tangent, but I'm going to say it anyways. We talked about the world we live in and how we serve people today. So when you deal with organizations, customer service is 100% right away, and you get instant gratification, instant response. Hey, you want something from Amazon, you return it the next day, it's there, and all those things. Where when you join an organization, the people who are stressed out because of that is the employees. The employees are pushed, and most employees now don't have a calm, cool, collected onboarding period. They take their training, they onboard in 30 days, and they're working.
Yeah.
And that can, like you said, overwhelm people and to want to jump to something else because it doesn't feel like that was what the job description says, or it's way too fast moving. And it's mostly because you just really don't have a full understanding of what you're supposed to be doing, so you feel overwhelmed. So it's a bit of a crazy environment to be in, but always implore people to master their own role and peek in other places and explore to see if you have other passions. But don't make rash decisions.
Yep. And, we've talked about this from the adult learning theory, and then maybe we put this one to bed and stop kind of beating this over and over, this drum over and over again. But we've talked about it from like adult learning theory, and we've talked about it, think about the modern learners, some studies that have been done. Learners want choice when they get to a place where they're adults, and they don't want to be dictated to more often than not. So you're actually speaking to your learners as well by letting them find opportunities and pursue their own, if you will, agenda or their preferences. And so, that one size fits all approach, if you can find a way to break that mold, I think you're going to find great success. Well, hopefully today's conversation gave you a few thoughts to just think about when you're talking about the way I want my employees maybe to learn or approach their jobs, things you can do to help support them in their decision making to make them more successful. But as you know, this time of the day, we always decide we want to share a little energy, a little enthusiasm with our audience, our listeners. It feels a little weird not to be you go on a camera and I get to like actually share this experience, which is a great segue because I'm going to talk about my get happy point for today. I completed my North American bingo card for the year of 2020. What are we? 2021 now, I guess. Time is elusive. I got to go to Mexico this year. I was living in the United States, and I have now arrived in Canada. And it feels good to just sit next to you. We got to share a meal for the first time in almost 2 years this week, which was exciting.
We didn't actually share a meal. We just
no, that's fair. We participated in an eating extravaganza together, but no, it feels a little normal, like just a little bit of normalcy, I guess, and hopefully that is a sign of things to come. So it feels good.
I'll build off of that. I just added a second, positivity point for the day. My first is I'm not only seeing Scott today, but get to go back and travel for the first time in 2 years, basically. Headed to Nashville in a couple weeks, so we'll see each other again. We can share another meal.
There we go.
Maybe this time we'll actually share the same meal.
We can split a steak or something.
But no, my positivity point is about Halloween. Oakley went trick-or-treating, my daughter, for the first time. She was a bit shy the first time around, but that little Minnie Mouse, as soon as she realized that people were giving her candy and chocolate at the door, I've never seen her move so fast. Just up and down the driveways looking for candy. One of the dads gave me a Heineken, so I like that type of trick-or-treating.
Hey, you're going to find adult trick-or-treating is a thing.
We'll take that. But no, it was one of those moments as a dad that I was just over the moon. It was so much fun. So
I will say, so as another positivity point for me as well was I have been looking forward to meeting Oakley since before she was born. And so yesterday, despite the fact she did not like me, I am apparently very scary to a 2-year-old with the mask and everything else. But I did actually finally get to meet her, so I'm going to rub that in my wife's face when I get home, that I got to meet Oakley for the first time while here. So that was exciting too. I've been looking for, we get to see the pictures all the time. It's always better in person. So she was very cute, even though she was hiding behind Daniel's leg the entire time. So it was all right. But that will do it for us today. Live and in person, here we are. We will talk to you again in a couple weeks, but have a good one, everybody.
Talk to you later. You said have a good one.
I know.
Yeah. That's okay.
Podcast. Good. Will They Learn podcast. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. Join the conversation by emailing us at podcast@halight.com. Find us on social media at Build It, Learn It, and be sure to check us out on the web at www.halight.com. That's HALIGHT.com.